This video is based off of OCTranspo's official timeline. Head to the link in the description below to see the full OCTranspo timeline. 3 years after Confederation in 1867, Ottawa, the Canadian capital city, was served by a network of horse-drawn cable cars. These cable cars were operated by the Ottawa City Passenger Railway Company. Unfortunately, service was halted 2 years later in 1872, with all but 50 horses in the city's stock having fallen ill to the Great Epizootic, or influenza. This affected the whole city, but the streetcar services particularly had to come to a close until January of 1873. One horse died during this epizootic, and we'll have a moment of silence for that horse. But the epizootic made more North American cities question the reliability of animal-drawn transport, which may mean that that very horse made a sacrifice for the sake of North America. Now it's 1885, and Ottawa has become the first city in history to have every street served by electric streetlights. That can be accredited to Tom Ahern and Warren Soper, who were apparently passionate for power. This drove them to electrify Ottawa's streetcar network in 1891, and that was a huge plus for the city. The floors that used to be layered in straw because horse were cleaned up, and electricity could heat riders up cleaner and more well than the old coal-powered heaters did. Ahern didn't stop there though, because he became Mr. Plow and added an electric snowplow to all the rolling stock. Now, the OCPRC became the OERC, for Ottawa Electric Railway Company, solidifying the early era of electricity for Ottawa. Now we're in the 20th century, and I'll start what's going to be a long century off with this question. What was the first O-train? Well, a defining characteristic of today's O-train service is being grade separated, meaning it doesn't run on roads like Toronto's streetcar or, even a better example, Ottawa's old streetcar did. So you probably buzzed either the Trillium line or Confederation line. And either answer is right-ish. But what if I told you Ottawa's first O-train wasn't from 2001, but rather 1900? Get to know on the other side of the river was making a nice park, Queen's Park, and Ottawa was looking to compete. So not only did they buy 18 acres of land in a small hamlet called Britannia and turn it into an amusement park, they also built a seemingly grade-separated trolley between this post office near Parliament and Britannia on the bay. It was a hit, and since it seems like the streetcar only paralleled Richmond Road and didn't run in the center, it could technically be called a tram or LRT, and I definitely want to call the Britannia line the first O-train. In fact, it partially resembles the route of the future O-train extension to Algonquin and Moody, following Richmond Road, and it even had a station at Westboro like the extension will. But we still have a lot of years to get through, such as during the Great War, where the streetcars hosted advertisements encouraging people to join the war effort, and ran charter services for fundraisers for things like the Prisoners of War Fund in 1916. Finally, the war ended in 1918, but an influenza came to Canada the same year. And this time, the horses were not the one in trouble. The Spanish flu was touched down in Canada from the troops who returned back home. And although almost every business in the city was closed for the Spanish, the OER stayed open and actually improved itself during this time, better cleaning, ventilating, and fumigating the trolleys. Ridership dropped significantly at one point, but it picked up in the same year, according to the OER's annual report for 1918. In 1924, now only 100 years ago rather than 155, Ottawa became the 4th Canadian city to experiment with bus service, starting with a short route on Elgin Street, near the Rideau River. Shockingly, although at this point over 100 kilometers of rail ran across the city streets, connecting Ottawa citizens daily, buses actually grew on people for their quietness and how little they broke down in comparison to the trolley. Today, the buses in Ottawa and their frequency seem depressing, but that's not depressing as an actual depression, the Great Depression. 3 million fewer people are riding on streetcar because it was seen as a luxury during these times. But the OER went and bought 6 handsome buses that actually went and made them luxurious. But they kept the price the same. Did it work? Probably. But the Great Depression was now followed up by the Second World War. Now the OER saw an influx of riders, especially military personnel, and all the activity happening in the capital city required the OER to step up service. From introducing rear door boarding and service simplification, all the way to ordering trims painted khaki green in case they needed to be forged into tranks. It was crunch time for Ottawa citizens, and it was crunch time for the OER. Fortunately, the war ended in 1945, and Ottawa was no longer as much in a frenzy, so the city bought the OER for $86 million in today's money, and gave it a new name, the Ottawa Transit Commission. All the bus routes and streetcars were in Ottawa's hands now, and we're only halfway through the 20th century. Unfortunately, in 1959, streetcars left Ottawa streets after 68 years. A parade was held with over 25,000 present, and 9 months later, the transition from streetcars to buses was complete. Towards the end of the 60s, Ottawa Transit was now realizing that the city's suburbs were not served by buses, which is a problem. Instead of taking a NIMBYist approach, however, they adopted public transit first thinking and brought buses to the suburbs. What followed was a large quality improvement for the routes, including new shelters and detailed route maps. Now it's 1973, and the name OCTranspo has finally been given. O makes sense, but C? Well, C stands for Carlton.
It's not unusual to get copyright strike.
Which was the other half of the city at that point. Ottawa, Carlton, Transpo. Awesome. The colors red and white were also adopted around this time, and buses were repainted this way. No more war khaki green. Now we can start to see our modern OCTranspo come alive, from the style to the service. In the decade next, Ottawa introduced paratransit after a variety of companies had tried but failed to provide accessible transport in the NCR. Already, Ottawa was innovating transit, but what they did next was revolutionary. The city was going to build a network of roads for buses only, and they were going to call them transitways. The transitways served long express routes like 95 and 97, which are both iconic in the city's history. And at its peak, the transitway, which still exists today but in smaller quantity, was 38 kilometers in length. The 90s for OCTranspo were home to free events. Because it's a sensitive topic, this video is going to be skipping the 1999 St. Lawrence bus massacre. The other two things that happened in the 90s for OCTranspo: they launched their website, which I managed to recreate in HTML because I couldn't find a real one anywhere. And 2, the ice storm hit Ottawa in 98, but buses and the transitway remained, with extra buses being available for emergencies during that time. Fun fact, emergency services are the only other vehicles permitted to use the transitway, outside of buses. Now we enter the 2000s, and urban rail is finally returning to Ottawa with the introduction of the O-Train.
It's not the national dream, but it certainly has been Bob Chiarelli's.
The O-Train used diesel locomotives to carry people between Bayview and Greenboro, and it did this all the way until May 2020. But before we get there, we need to talk about the Confederation Line. Ottawa's central and downtown transitways were insanely packed, and it was time for the service to be simplified, which is why the Confederation Line began construction in 2014 and opened to the public in 2019. The Confederation Line, or Line 1, has served the city ever since, running from Tunney's Pasture in the west to Blair in the east, serving downtown, the University of Ottawa, Ottawa Via Rail Station, and much more. Service on Line 1 hasn't changed since, but Line 2 has gone through a lot since the COVID pandemic. When it reopened in 2025 after a 5-year hiatus, it was much longer, and it had a new airport shuttle that ran between South Keys and Airport via Upland. Paired with the remaining transitway, this is what the OCTranspo network looks like today, in 2025. With the addition of Line 3, or the Canada Line, and Line 1's extension to Orleans, this is what the full network will look like by 2027. Also on the horizon is a BRT on Baseline Road, and of course the Gatineau LRT. But we left out the history of Society of Transport Outaouais in this video because, as you can see, that is not Ottawa. It is Nottawa. So that was OCTranspo's history, from the 1870 streetcars to 2025's streetcars. Otherwise, I don't have anything left, so like, subscribe, and comment down below. And don't forget to keep talking.